Hi, my name is Chris, aka The Philosopher's Games, or TPhGames as my little games channel here is called, and today I want to discuss Microsoft potentially buying Activision Blizzard. Of course, the deal is not complete yet, and some antitrust agencies still have some concerns, but I personally think it's relatively likely that they will find an agreement at some point. And also, Microsoft and Activision Blizzard announced that they have extended the merger agreement deadline to the 18th of October. This was posted by Phil Spencer on his official Twitter account. He also posted some days ago that Microsoft and PlayStation, so Sony, have signed a binding agreement to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation following the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. I also read this deal is kind of limited to 10 years. So we see definitely preparations for this acquisition being done in the background as well, and kind of finding agreements with the other big gaming companies in the industry as well. In this video, I don't want to focus on if this deal will happen, but more on the consequences if it happens. I personally think that this deal might not be good for the games industry as a whole, and also for us consumers, for us gamers in the long run. It might be really good for us consumers now and in the upcoming years, because Microsoft has to pretend that they are the good guys and that currently the competitive situation is not great and that this deal would vastly improve this, that they are more like a small indie company and not one of the biggest companies on this planet, and also maybe that they had a little bit bad luck in the past and that is why the situation is like this. It's not because they did completely nonsensical decisions in the past or something like that. No, it's not that. And maybe they have a rich uncle that can give them a little bit of pocket money to help them out, even out the situation. It has nothing to do that Microsoft in the past also had antitrust problems and that there could be a connection and them having some monopolies almost in certain areas. No, nothing to do with that. And all, or at least parts of this, they have to pretend just to get the deal through. Also, sorry for being so sarcastic here. And this gives us, in the short run, some good games, because they have to invest, they maybe have to revive some long-dead franchises that weren't treated well in the past, and all the stuff also gets to their Game Pass service, which becomes more attractive as a result, and so Xbox also becomes more attractive for a lot of people, or the PC platform, which also profits from this, because according to the Steam hardware survey, 96.7% of gamers on Steam use a Microsoft operating system. What could possibly go wrong if they take $78 billion and start buying publishers and development studios? What could possibly go wrong? I think a big problem is just realizing how much money $70 billion is, especially in relation to other video game company acquisitions. I think in the video game history, this is the biggest acquisition we have ever seen. I think the next biggest would be Take-Two buying Zynga in 2022 for 12.7 billion, which is still a huge difference. Only very few companies on the planet could have pulled this off, especially when they are not in the biggest or best position on this specific market. That would be also Amazon or Apple. And they can only do this because their position on the market is so dominant in of itself that they became these mega corporations that are also not very good for competition in of itself. It's not like Xbox did insanely well as a company and did many smart decisions in the past, and these are now the fruits they earned out of it. No, that is totally not how it is. It is Microsoft just saying, yeah, we lost a lot of market share to Sony, so this is how we get back on track. We just pump in $70+ billion into this company, and then we take over the market maybe at some point. Of course, from Microsoft's perspective, this makes kind of sense for them and is potentially even a smart move. I thought buying Bethesda was a very smart move by Microsoft, and I also think that Activision is potentially also a quite smart move by Microsoft. But from the perspective of their competitors, of us consumers, and let's say the games industry itself, it is at least debatable. And I'm not saying that Microsoft should just wait and do nothing and buy no company at all and just leave Sony the market. But I think buying Activision is maybe a bit excessive. And I know that Sony or PlayStation is also buying companies, and they have these annoying timed exclusives and sometimes even kind of full exclusives if we think of that Final Fantasy VII Remake is still not on Xbox and stuff like that. Of course, Sony also have their bad practices, and of course, Microsoft has to do something about it. And building studios from ground up is insanely difficult. So buying other studios is a valid option and potentially the only option Microsoft or Xbox actually has. But we still have to get our heads around this number, 70 billion. For example, Sony bought in 2019 Insomniac. They have 400 employees, and that is the developer of, for example, the Spider-Man games on PlayStation or Ratchet & Clank. And they paid for that $229 million. This fits 305 times into 70 billions. That is how much money that is. Sony also bought Bungie last year for $3.6 billion. They have 1,500 employees roundabout. And of course, Bungie is still a big developer and they also have valuable IP. But even that deal fits 19 times into $70 billion. It is just how absurd this number is. It is 77 times Twitch.tv. It is, 17.5 times Star Wars or 28 times Minecraft. 9 times ZeniMax, that is the parent company of Bethesda and id Software, and some other development studios. Just imagine Sony would casually announce, oh, by the way, we just bought 19 publisher/development studios the size of Bungie. People's mind would just explode. And of course, I understand that Microsoft/Xbox buying Activision Blizzard won't give them 19 times the output of Bungie when it comes to video games or AAA video games. Still, they have very valuable IP, and they of course have 17,000 employees, and among those are some of the best shooter developers on this planet. Like, they have a lot of expertise, which is worth quite a bit. They have a very strong market position, even though they iterate the same game all the time. But this could change under a different leadership. And that is also why a lot of people see also some positive in it, me included. I think Microsoft has to invest, they need new games, and they could put those 17,000 employees on all kinds of projects, which might be very interesting in the future. The problem is that these potential future deals will point most likely towards Microsoft. Of course, they could also become multi-platform releases. This is not excluded. But it is always at the grace of Microsoft now. It is their decision. It is not a decision made completely driven by the market itself. Activision, as an independent publisher, would say, well, we want to sell the most possible units of this game, so we release it on all the big platforms, PlayStation, Xbox, and if it runs, even on the Nintendo Switch if possible. That is a market-driven decision. Microsoft could say, well, Sony is doing a little bit too well. We need our exclusive games on our platform. We need to get these killer apps out that people start buying Xbox again, so Sony won't get the game. Of course, there is a deal for Call of Duty for the next 10 years that Sony and Microsoft have signed, and Call of Duty will be on PlayStation for the next 10 years. But also, what is if this deal runs out in 10 years? And that is exactly what I mean with, in the long run, it might not be such a great deal. It's never good if one company holds too much market power, and buying a big company like this is definitely such a devastatingly big move, in my opinion, that I seriously fear there could be negative consequences. Of course, we know of also Xbox-owned companies that still push out multi-platform releases. For example, Mojang, the developers of Minecraft. Minecraft is still on PlayStation 5 and will also remain there, I think, also on the Switch. And there are also these games like Minecraft Dungeons and I think Minecraft Legends, also, to my knowledge, multi-platform releases. So it's not excluded, but the possibility is there. It's always at the grace of Microsoft. It's now their decision. They are now calling the shots. It is not a decision that is purely directed to making the most money and releasing on the most platforms possible. Of course, there are also these annoying timed exclusive deals that PlayStation consistently gets because they can easily exploit their current market position. They have just the bigger installment base, and as a result, they can get those deals, pay a little bit, and I assume still make money out of this, which is much more difficult for example, Xbox right now. They have the money to make those deals, but the question is also, will they make the money back? And here it becomes a little bit of a tough spot for Xbox, it seems. Still, those deals are, as the name suggests, timed, temporarily. It's better when a game comes for the other console half a year later than never. And this could potentially happen and would be at the grace of Microsoft, and their decision doing so is not driven by them making the maximum amount of money. If we also look a bit further into the future, we can also see that ownership of games might be reduced further. Physical is declining, digital sales go up. Game Pass now puts this to a next level where we don't buy the game anymore, we buy a subscription and get the games with a subscription. If it ends, we also lose access to those games. We are not owning them anymore. And don't get me wrong, the Game Pass has insane value, even though it got more expensive, but it still slowly dismantles the concept of ownership of video games. And that is something I don't really like. If we think this further into the future, Stadia as cloud gaming service might have failed, but GeForce Now is still out there, and also is Xbox Cloud Gaming. Xbox Cloud Gaming is not in a great spot right now. It's, in my opinion, technically not as impressive as, for example, GeForce Now or Stadia was, but it is still there, and cloud gaming was also one of the biggest arguments against this deal between Microsoft and buying Activision Blizzard. Still, if we think this further, at some point when internet connections become maybe more consistent, independent of your location, and at higher speeds available, then this idea could become a huge hit at some point. But then we would also be at the grace of our internet provider, of our ISP, and at the grace of the service we are playing on, let's say xCloud. Add the Game Pass to that, then we play on a system we don't own, games that we don't own, and are at the mercy of our internet provider, and that the cloud gaming service works probably, else we are screwed. And this gives very few companies a lot of power over our favorite hobby. And just imagining this is something I really dislike. Also imagine what in a scenario like this would happen to prices, and if for whatever reason one of the competitors of Microsoft would just vanish. Just think about what could happen to the prices. We can currently see what happens when you have too little competition on the graphics card market, with Nvidia pulling prices from, I don't know, outer space, and AMD, their competitors, just doing the bare minimum. But just imagine there would be a third competitor. And that is why I'm rooting for Intel also getting onto the graphics card market and seeing some success, because we are in desperate need of a third competitor there. Because if you only have one, then it's an absolute nightmare. If you have two, it's at least something, but also not great, especially if those two would at some point decide to not play fair anymore. And I'm not saying that this is currently the case, and I really mean it, but it has happened before that there were some secret agreements between two big companies. So it's good having this competition. Having multiple platforms that are successful is a good thing. It's also a good thing to have these third-party publishers, these independent publishers who bring out games independent of platform policies and marketing strategies. Further, you have to consider that we won't get any new third-party publisher the size of Activision Blizzard that is independent anytime soon. That means that the current status quo will definitely change, and that for quite some time. We only have what currently exists, which is one of the new players might be Embracer Group and what they built up with THQ Nordic, of course, but they're also struggling. Ubisoft is also kind of struggling, and EA also did some restructuring recently. And that's basically it. We also have CD Projekt, and maybe they can get to a similar size if they just nail every release the upcoming 1.5 decades or something, but that's a lot of ifs. Then I almost forgot Take-Two, which is really big, and of course Tencent, which is massive. In Japan we have Square Enix, Bandai Namco, Capcom, Sega, maybe Konami, and some others, so there are still a few publishers left. There are also some smaller publishers that are quite promising, like Focus Entertainment and Devolver Digital, so there are definitely some players, but I don't see that they will ever get this size. And maybe that is a good thing in of itself. Maybe we have now space for more smaller independent publishers. Of course, on the other side, Activision Blizzard is still there and has its market share, so maybe difficult to predict how much space for others might be there. And of course, Activision Blizzard was also not doing much besides Call of Duties and, I don't know, a bit of Overwatch, a bit of Diablo, a bit of Warcraft expansion here and there, and that's basically it. Sekiro was already a huge outlier from their usual iteration formula that they use. And it kind of works. In these legal files we learned that Sony alone makes like $900 million every year from Call of Duty alone, and they don't even produce the game. That is, I guess, also the reason why Sony wanted this specific deal for Call of Duty in 10 years. Speaking of Sony, they are also put under a lot of pressure by this purchase, because now they have to nail every decision and every game release, because they can't really lose market share here, because they don't have a rich uncle that just gives them $70 billion to buy the next big publisher. They even could try to establish a competitor for Call of Duty over the next 10 years to be prepared when the deal runs out. But don't get me wrong, this acquisition of Activision Blizzard will bring Xbox much closer in the market to PlayStation, and we will see a more competitive market, which is good. The question is, what happens if the dust settles? Maybe in the end, this deal was not worth it for Microsoft or Xbox at all. It could also be that Microsoft wins and steamrolls everything from now on and becomes more and more powerful. That would be, I think, the most negative scenario. But I'm pretty sure that if it should run not well for Sony in like a decade or so, that they won't be able to just buy a publisher for 70, 80 or whatever amount of billions they want to spend just to get their market share back. That won't happen. They have to play the game normally. And that is, I think, the most worrying thing about this. Another puzzle piece in all of this is, of course, the Game Pass and Microsoft pushing this model very hard and investing into it. We know from interviews and articles that they did not make really money on it, and it's a huge investment, and they really try to get enough customers on it, enough subscribers, that it becomes economically feasible at some point, and then they potentially also increase the prices to make it work financially for them as well. I guess that's always the plan. But when we think back, it was just insanely good value, especially if you could get like 2 weeks or something for €1 or $1 for some time. That was pretty insane. But just imagine now all Activision Blizzard games are on it. It could definitely become more popular. And currently, this is also good for developers because they want to be on Game Pass and potentially get seen, because Microsoft needs those games on Xbox. So it's good that developers come to Microsoft and say, hey, we have this little game here. Can we bring it to Game Pass? This gives good PR to Microsoft, and they also get some good games on their platform, and the developer gets paid. And that is the win-win situation currently. But what happens if the Game Pass gets, or its library gets saturated? If there are too many games on it and suddenly you don't get seen on it anymore. And suddenly it becomes more and more difficult to even get on Game Pass, especially if Microsoft's own output is suddenly big enough to fill it by themselves. Then Microsoft would have a lot of control, especially if this grows further and becomes a standard and basically dominates the market, just in a worst case scenario. Then Microsoft would have a lot of control about who is on Game Pass and who not. That is definitely a big concern I have. Further, it could also put a lot of pressure onto other publishers and their pricing, because if I buy a game and say I get 3 months of Xbox Game Pass for it, why should I buy this game full price? It could definitely lead to other developers maybe having to adjust their prices when they are not on Game Pass and have to sell them normally. That is definitely a fear I have, but this would only be a problem when this becomes really big and like a really dominating part of the market. Currently that is not what we see, but I fear that if things swing into the direction of Microsoft too strong and they become too dominant on the market, and this purchase just shows that this could totally happen, then this could actually become a problem in the future. So in a worst case scenario, we could see that there is a shift in the perception of the customers kind of globally or in the West on how much they want to spend on a single video game. This could be reduced, and as a result, it becomes more difficult to sell one video game at a certain price because customers are suddenly used to these subscription models and lose the perception of how expensive it is to make video games. Well, inside the industry, I don't fear for this problem because I think inside the industry, people simply know how expensive it is to make, for example, a AAA game. The question is always, if we are used to these subscription models, will our perception change because the average customer does not know how expensive it is to make a video game and what a reasonable price would be. And we also coming from a very long time where video game prices were very consistent with just some increases recently, also pushed by Sony, by the way. But over a long time under all these subscription services, this perception could be lost. Another thing I could totally imagine is that Microsoft will also try to get stronger onto the mobile market because Activision Blizzard has King in it. They make Candy Crush, for example, and we also have something like Diablo Immortal with Blizzard. And unfortunately, the mobile market is the biggest gaming market. The future is of course hard to predict, but I'm pretty sure should this deal be completed, it will definitely have a huge impact on the gaming industry for the next 10-15 years for sure. And then we might look back and think of the good old days. Let us hope for the best, same as I'm hoping that if you're still listening, you press the like button, maybe leave a comment and press subscribe plus the annoying bell. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think about this deal in the comments. I'm definitely interested in different opinions, though I'm not interested in this whole console war debate and which console is better and Sony did this, Microsoft did that. That is, in my opinion, nonsensical. There are very big companies with very rich people in it. They have money to pay people defending them. We don't need to do this for them for free, in my opinion. Further, I also have some social media stuff. It's all in the description. Check it out. Maybe Twitter, Twitch, my YouTube main channel with Lord of the Rings content. There's also a stream archive and whatnot. If you're interested in any of those, maybe check it out. Would be appreciated. Let me also hint at that I still plan to make the Cyberpunk mod highlight showcase video, whatever that will be called at the end. And I'm also looking, of course, forward to the Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty DLC coming in September, but that's still relatively far away. But there are some other games like the new FromSoft game Armored Core coming out. There is Baldur's Gate 3 and Starfield. It's a really busy time. Also, maybe check my other Cyberpunk 2077 coverage I did recently. I did a video about past racing. I did a video about what will be changed when Phantom Liberty is released. If you're interested in this, check those out as well. Huge shout out and thanks to all the people supporting me in all the different ways. So again, thank you people for watching and see you next time. Goodbye.